Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our weekly roundup by Blockchain Gamer.biz. It's been a few weeks since we've been doing this due to Easter holidays and other things. So we're very happy to be back. It's Friday, the 12th of April. I'm your host, Jenny Jordan, and with me is co-host John Jordan. So I'm going to run down the headlines for this week. Probably the top news we'll be talking about, because you know quite a lot about this, John, is the Eternal Dragons has just announced that they're shutting down. They'll refund some of the NFT holders for... We'll go into all the details about that later. Lattice, the French Web3 developer, is about to launch its Redstone mainnet. The Redstone whole sky has been in testing for a while, and I think some applications have been running on it. But with sort of the big launch, there'll also be a couple of fully on-chain games and autonomous worlds also launching on the blockchain. We have been getting the first sort of more proper gameplay footage this week from Ubisoft's Champions Tactics, and that's kind of funny, coincidentally, because at the start of the week we were just sort of wondering, should we write something about what's happened to Champions Tactics? It's been very quiet around this game. All we've sort of known is that things have been delayed. They have sort of hinted at that at Discord, nothing official, but there were sort of all these dates announced, and then not much seems to have been happening. But now finally we have that and that sort of came out in conjunction with the Paris Blockchain Week. Move on. So Metalcore has launched its closed beta on Immutable CKEVM. So it is basically the first playable game built by Immutable on its CKEVM mainnet. You've been talking to Shrapnel, Don
Norbury, yeah.
Norbury, yes. Really fantastic interview, so insightful. He's very open about sort of talking about the game's current development and just a vision of blockchain and even sort of combining blockchain with potential kind of move into console, and loads of good details from that interview. And finally, what did you write here? Are blockchain games too grindy, especially around airdrops? Yeah, they might be. Let's hear your views on that, John, later on. Let's kick off. Let's dive into a bit more about Eternal Dragons as we start.
Yeah, so obviously never sort of nice to hear about a blockchain game shutting down, but obviously we know there's there are 954 we're tracking on the list, so the majority of those games are not going to be successful. So I imagine hundreds are going to be shutting down over the next few years. Obviously new ones will be coming. That's the way of the games industry. But I guess what's interesting is in this case, and in terms of best practice, when a developer knows that it is going to sort of shut something down, it's in control of that process rather than suddenly going, oh, we've run out of money. Oh, everyone's sacked, sort of thing. So we get a lot of that in blockchain, and we spend a lot of time trying to work out whether projects are live or not, or whether they've just sort of stopped using Twitter or whatever. It's quite difficult to do in most cases. These are not experienced teams in most cases. They just sort of it just sort of dribbles away. So Trailblazer Games are the developer. They are an experienced team, come out of King and EA and Microsoft. They raised $8 million back in 2022. I vaguely know some of them. I know some of the investors a little bit. So this is a proper team who've done proper things before and had sort of a vision for what they were doing. So Eternal Dragons is sort of it's a PvP game. It's sort of lane-based sort of tactics game, sort of turn-based, where you're sort of as you sort of have a deck of deck of units, and then you have a certain amount of mana per turn. You can put the units onto the lanes, and they interact in different ways. And obviously, they're fighting each other in a sort of automatic way. It's like a sort of auto chess game to some degree, a lane-based auto chess game. So I did play it a while ago. It was a browser-based game to begin with. I quite liked the basic gameplay. They did. They sort of. I don't quite know why they chose Solana, but anyway, they went on Solana when a lot of games were choosing Solana in its sort of early 2022, sort of late 2021, I suppose. And Solana, that was when it got its first big peak, all-time high, $250, I think, for a Sol token. And they sort of timed that. They just happened to be lucky. They timed that right. And so lots of stuff's going on with Solana. Their NFTs, I think, at one point had a floor price of over $500, something like that. Anyway, some of them sold for tens of thousands of dollars. But then obviously it becomes you actually have to make the game. And that's obviously where I wouldn't say struggled, but I think anyone can make a game. But then if you're an inexperienced game developer, you're not very, I think, nuanced as to, is that game fun? Is that game hitting what the audience wants? Can we track data around people playing this game as much as they need to? I think inexperienced people just go, we made a game, it's great. And they sort of like, take an airdrop, and think that's enough. Whereas proper developers are just like, right, what's the KPIs on this? What's the 1 day retention? What's the 7 day retention? What's the 30 day retention? Is anyone spending money in this game? And there's some pretty standard metrics that game developers would know. If your game's not hitting, I'm making this up now. If your 30 day retention is less than sort of 20%, then there's something wrong. You have to you can't launch a game in that state, sort of thing. So I think Trailblaze they made a game. They started thinking about how they could make, particularly how they could make money off it, and they sort of pivoted a little bit where they went, well, instead of being a browser game for more crypto people, we're going to be a mobile game for more Web 2 people and having app purchases in there. And obviously they had experience in mobile, so that was sort of, I guess, where they maybe wanted to go in the long term anyway. And obviously we now have examples of games like NFL Rivals, which are through the app stores and seems to be sort of, I don't know if that's profitable, but it seems to be people are buying, people are making money, people are spending money in that game for in-app purchases, as well as the NFT side. So, and then they sort of realised as they got into the mobile stuff, some of the decisions they'd made early on when they weren't on mobile and going through app stores were sort of difficult, because app stores obviously allow you to do stuff, but only in a certain way. So that sort of restricts what you can do. And they had, as every blockchain game has, they had problems with people sort of cheating and playing against each other to game the system, and other. We've seen that in probably every other game, but PvP games tend to have that where I'll play you and you won't play properly, so I beat you by miles, and then I'm doing that every day, and I'm seem to be a brilliant player, but I'm only ever playing sock puppets or whatever. So all in all, it's a bit of a struggle. And then obviously during that time, Solana sort of had its collapse, and I remember actually I spoke to one of the guys sort of November 2020. 2022, when Solana was at its worst, and they were a bit shell shocked, because Solana had gone from $250 to, like, I think under $20 at one point. So they just felt a bit beaten up by it. So I think the combination of all that sort of stuff, and again, they felt that I think they thought they could continue developing it and get it to a stage they wanted to, but that was going to take them probably another year. They would have had to do another fundraising round, probably had to raise another 5 to 10 million. They'd raised 8 already. And I think they sort of felt maybe, I don't know if the investors at the moment are not desperate to put in more money to things, I think. So I think they just came to a sort of a grown-up decision that they could continue to do it. They're a 23 strong team based in Singapore, so they're not not sort of cheap sort of kids in a garage. I think they just thought there are better things we can do with our time, and if we raise more money, then sort of flog this horse that's sort of dying. So I think that's a very grown-up decision. As you say, they have a bit of money left, and they are going to allow people to burn NFTs. So I think if you have the cheapest dragon, I think I have about 3 actually. 3 of the dragon NFTs, and you get $12 USDC for that. And if you have the most rare, I think mythical ones, the rarest dragons anyway, you can get 150 USDC. So they've not announced the details of that, and they've not announced how to do that and the timing of that. But basically, they will announce here's a burn address, or here's an address. Send your unwanted NFTs to this address, and we'll send you back the USDC as a it's probably for most people not going to cover what they paid for them, but it's sort of the floor price is now about $20, I think, last time I looked. So, but it's more like a gesture of sort of like we're completing this process sort of properly and taking the whole thing seriously, and not it's not rugging you and blah blah blah. So it's sort of sad from that point of view, but a good sort of process, and I think it reflects well on them as a team. I think
Pixels, I know Luke Bobikowski said on Twitter something, you know, about how small they are, really.
I mean, I think there's space for all types of developers, and they all make all different sorts of games. So I would say, I think Trailblazer, I think, we're not a particularly large team. You know, there were 23 people, which is, for a game dev team, is not big. You know, so I think the hardest thing is normally where you find sort of inexperienced small teams are underfunded and just they can't fulfill the vision they want because they're inexperienced and they don't have enough money. So those ones are just sort of like, they're the ones that sort of just die away and no one hears about them. I think you are right. There is an advantage for very scrappy, very committed teams that have sort of come together over the last couple of years who are very focused on crypto. So those are more crypto native teams. So those would be teams, as you say, like Hytopia and teams like Pixels, both of which are sort of 20 people. But, they are, I mean, they're not kids, but I imagine they're a lot of them in their 20s and maybe 30s. And they are sort of experienced. So they've done some tech stuff before. They've gone, but they've not been working at high positions in EA or Microsoft or something, or game development. So they have a slight scrappiness. They have an age advantage. They can throw a lot of time in it. Probably don't have families, don't have big mortgages, and those guys are sort of like without being rude about it, maybe the wrong analogy, but those are sort of the cockroaches. Those people are just so committed to what they're doing. They literally, you can't kill them off. If they had to go and get a job, they'd be building Hytopia at the weekend, or So those have an advantage in the sense that they will keep working and they have a vision. Their disadvantage is, can they fulfill that vision to a high enough quality bar? So that's sort of like and you can argue for Pixels for 2 years. They weren't doing that. They were working away. They had a sort of community of a few thousand people. But if they hadn't gone to Ronin, they'd still be doing that. They'd still be on that level. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of everything. Every sort of team structure has a strength and a weakness, and it's sort of knowing what those are, and it's knowing and sort of making the product that fits into the way you're making it. So if you're a scrappy team trying to do something, we're making AAA graphics. And I guess that's the problem with like the Star Atlases of the world, who sort of raised an enormous amount of money, were inexperienced, then raised an enormous, then got an enormous amount of people, and then just the whole thing fell apart. And they had to effectively go back to, we're going to be scrappy. I mean, there's still 60 people, but they had to sort of reinvent what they were doing in the open, which is sort of, how we know all about sort of that, what happened. But they own that process. I think other teams like Illuvium, I am less convinced about, really, that they've understood the lessons. But anyway.
Mm-hmm. And talking of discontinued games, actually, we should also mention we released the big blockchain game report this week, which goes through the first quarter of 2024, sort of overlooking the industry broadly in terms of investments, in terms of tokens launching. I'll talk a bit more about that later, but also kind of new games, which ecosystems are gaining the new games, and which ecosystems have seen their titles dropping off. And Solana is, for sort of natural, obvious reasons, still one of the ecosystems that are losing the most, together with Polygon. So you basically compiled that report. It's been a work sort of over a couple of
So I think you're right. We looked at what's going on in terms of the big blockchain game list. So there were games, obviously games being discontinued all the time. There's more games at the moment, sort of being announced. So from that point of view, the overall sort of ecosystem is still growing. But you see differences in sort of where games are being discontinued and where games are being announced. So as you say, sort of Solana is still in decline. I'm not really seeing any big high quality games announcing for Solana. A lot of the sort of new games are sort of announcing for sort of Ethereum based L2s. That's where a lot of the activity is. And overall, we are sort of seeing now there's sort of a subtle shift between Polygon, which is still the biggest, joint biggest sort of single chain for gaming, but a lot of those Polygon is sort of dropping, but that's partly because people are going to things like Immutable, but Immutable's running Polygon under the surface, so there's this sort of slight marketing sort of thing where people are going, we're using Immutable ZK EVM, but Immutable ZK EVM is actually running Polygon's ZK EVM underneath. So there's sort of a swapping. We're sort of seeing Polygon going to Immutable, but the two are sort of, in many cases, sort of broadly the same. But certainly Solana and the non-EVM chains are contracting.
And a couple of developers are deploying their games on the Redstone. So Small Brain Games, the developer behind Words 3 that deployed on Base initially, fully on chain, and Draw Tech. And I think he's also done another title since. I'm not entirely sure which game. I think it's not been confirmed yet. Actually, he is deploying there, so that's a bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
Got the UK-based studio Playmint, led by David and Moore, which you've had on the podcast and know quite well in the past. His autonomous world downstream is coming to Redstone as well as Lattice's own Sky Strife and ARPA networks. They're like a mobile sort of narrative-driven. I'm not entirely sure what it is actually. Narrative-driven type RPG, I think.
But it's, I guess sort of what I was saying in the bit covering the big list stuff is what we're seeing is a rise of all these sort of Ethereum-based L2s. I think the Redstone uses Optimism OP stacks. There's a lot of these tools where you can sort of you get the basic blockchain tech and then you sort of customize it to exactly how you want it, and then you sort of run an ecosystem on it. So the Lattice is really well known for fully on-chain games. They're a very strong community. So there's going to be a whole bunch of these sort of games on that as an ecosystem. And obviously we have sort of Treasure DAO is a sort of attempt to do a similar thing using Arbitrum. So they're running their own thing. And the High Chain from Hytopia is going to be a similar sort of thing. And we have Zaia, which is also running on Arbitrum as an L3, another thing. And you go through, there's a whole list of these sort of little ecosystems that are sort of trying to sort of build up a whole bunch of games and then have a whole bunch of sort of players on there. And
the kind of exciting thing is the CCP games, the EVE Online team, they announced a few weeks back that they were their Project Awakening game is coming to Redstone. So
well, they're using Lattice's game dev mud engine for blockchain. So and that's obviously we'll see how that one goes, but that's obviously as I say, you can imagine a scenario where CCP announce our EVE Online blockchain game is going to use Solana. I mean, that's something you could imagine in the past. Just nowadays, you're not having that. People are just much more nuanced about it. So they're running Solana. Solana's just like, we're really powerful. You can put anything on there. At the moment, Solana's massively congested because there's so much spam on it. So people have learned these sort of lessons in the past, and people want now. If you want a game that's going to be big, you basically want probably to run on your own infrastructure, and you're the only thing running on that, whether it's a subnet or what they call it, a subnet, supernet. But it's all these chainlets. There's all these different terms for basically running a game on your own blockchain infrastructure where you can absolutely customize what's going on there. And that was, just blow my own trumpet a little bit. That was sort of one of the things that Don was talking about in Shrapnel. So that's podcast, Blockchain Gaming World, episode 164, out now, usual places for podcasts and YouTube and that sort of stuff. And he was talking, when I was discussing with him, I was saying, 2 years ago, I had you first on the podcast, and you didn't say what blockchain you were on. You said you're thinking, you just working out what to do. And obviously they chose Avalanche, and they're very much the sort of poster child, I would say, for Avalanche. And they were the first people to say, we're going to run our own subnet on Avalanche. And he's like, he says, and I was sort of saying, well, it's interesting how that decision has been totally vindicated, because basically everyone's now running their own L2s, and he's like, yeah, but our subnet is basically an L1. So he wanted to sort of overplay Avalanche. And they really loves Avalanche, and I think Avalanche is one where you are seeing Shrapnel's there, Off the Grid, another big sort of shooter game that's coming to console. There's less than I thought. I think Avalanche
Story Universe is
of course, Maple Story Universe, that's the other big one, yeah. So some really big games on there, and Maple Story Universe is Nexon's biggest IP. Maple Story, as a 20-year-old MMO RPG, made Nexon, and they're a very serious Korean games company thinking about that sort of stuff. So I think you're sort of seeing now, that's where the sort of direction of flow is, when these big games companies are thinking about what they're doing. They're thinking about, I want my own infrastructure, and that means some sort of specialized subnet. It's not just I'm sticking it on Solana.
And recently, we've also seen sort of Ronin did an announcement, and not an official announcement, but they discussed on Twitter sort of their vision for allowing games to build out their own infrastructure. And Immutable did an announcement, and they called Immutable Nexus this week.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And both those things are basically, you have the Ronin blockchain or the Immutable ZK EVM blockchain that people can run on, but then if they want their own, effectively L2 on that, Ronin will let them have, there'll be a permissionless L2 that anyone can go on, but also a permissioned L2. So you can run your own, and it will be a ZK EVM probably. We don't quite know if they can use polygons or do their own. And the same thing with Immutable. Immutable's saying, if you want to run your own ZK EVM within our Immutable structure, you can do that. So it's kind of funny that actually one of the companies that comes out of this very well, I think, is Planetarium, the South Korean company, where I remember back in 2019 they were just like, every game should have its own blockchain, and at the time I was just like, this is potty. Why do we want to do all that? And I think there's still some reasons around it's problematic for composability and onboarding and stuff like that. But that's sort of where we're going within a sort of structure of having a main chain, however that's structured for security or whatever, and then everyone's just running their own chains underneath that. And I'm sure over time that thing will be much more sort of complicated of how these sort of chains all sort of interact with each other. But it won't effectively, it won't really. Every game will have its own blockchain that it can tweak and tune, but the audience won't really know, probably even on the blockchain.
Now, to the big question of the day, are blockchain games too grindy? What do you mean by that question to start with?
Yeah. Well, I do think
what is a grindy game? What do you mean? And particularly in terms of blockchain and airdrops.
So
through the sort of grinding loop and the problem with it.
So something like an MMORPG will typically be very grindy. So basically, you'll be doing tedious, repetitive things over and over again to get tiny rewards. So that's just how these games sort of work, because you're expected to play them for hundreds of hours, and so they have to make the game really structurally difficult. Otherwise, you can't have hundreds of hours of fun. You can have 9 hours of really tedious collecting the resources you need to craft this big sword, and then you get your big sword and you can go and kill the big boss, and then all the enemies are stronger and you have to go and crafting again. So it's sort of a tedium thing. It's a bit like life, tedium for a month and then you get paid, and then you're happy for a day, and then tedium for again. So but particularly when it comes to airdrops, where you're giving away free stuff, and you're giving away free stuff as a marketing mechanic to get people in, then you have to set the bar of what you have to do to earn the stuff super high. Otherwise, everyone's everyone's just earning the stuff really quickly. So I think it's a combination of, I was playing Block Laws, that's what I particularly did a video about, and Block Laws is a very grindy game anyway, and they have been doing these various airdrop campaigns, which have I wouldn't say extremely high, but fairly high bars for you to be able to claim in terms of what you're doing. And there's a particular issue with Block Lords that it's a resource sort of based farming game, at least the bit I'm in at the moment. And the game time only works if you're playing the game. So if it takes an hour to make something in the game, you have to be connected to the server for an hour. You can't set the process going and then switch the game off and then come back. And an hour of real time is an hour in the game. You have to be connected. So if something takes 24 hours in the game, you have to be, connected for 24 hours to do that. So that's a particular sort of issue where it's a PC game as well. So you have to, sort of leave the, leave your PC. Basically, if you want to maximize that game, you have to have a PC just playing that game all the time, which clearly for most people is not they're not going to be doing. But when there's money to be made, then people will be doing that. So you suddenly have this disconnect as to what a normal person who's interested in that game, such as I, can do. And then people who just want to go, right, I don't really care about this game, or maybe they do, but I'm just going to leave my computer on and I don't have a life. And blah, blah, blah. So that was just, there was a slight personal frustration on my point for that game. But I think that in general, airdrop sort of campaigns are very grindy and they make you do stupid things like connect to Twitter, tweet out, I love this game, it's great, every day, and you learn some points. And, it's just stupid hoops that you have to get people to jump through. And the people who will do that are not the people who you necessarily want in your game. So, I'm not a big influencer or anything like that, but, I don't shill on my Twitter account. I just don't do that. So there are some games that I would want to support, and maybe I would want to get an airdrop there, but they have these very specific templates of what I can do, because they have to basically, check that people have done it in order to get the points for the airdrop. And I can't go, well, I'll have a big podcast with the guy who's on the airdrop, and that will fill up my points deficit. I have to go through all the grindy, shilly, rubbishy things. So it's just, I'm going probably a bit ranty about it all, but
it can be a bit grindy, even if it's not airdrop. I know you've heard some sort of sighing around night crows as well from We Made.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with night crows, that's not actually the blockchain bit. That's just, it's an MMORPG. I mean, that's literally how those games run. You literally spend weeks doing the same thing. I mean, exactly the same thing to level up to the point at which you can.
And maybe it's not only blockchain games that can be too grindy, but particularly your point is sort of that it's not a great marketing tool, really.
And to be fair, the other thing is, to be fair to the game designers, if you don't using grind, then you have to use skill. So that in some ways, for me, it's even worse. So if I go back to Shrapnel is an extraction shooter where basically I turn up and walk around for a bit and get shot and then get grumpy and then, I mean, I've never been particularly good at shooter games. It's a very technical shooter game that you have to know the map and you have to pick things up and, and I can't throw enough time at that game to even, get good at that game, because I turn up and as soon as someone sees me, they shoot me and I'm dead. So there's no process for me to learn the skills I need to get good in that game. So, maybe I'm just, just grumpy.
Right, I've noticed your new meme cap.
Yeah.
Web3 gaming is inevitable. I got my Mojo Melee due to Mystic Moose announcing that they are selling physical toys.
Yes, they are, aren't they? That'd be nice.
Yeah. So, and on a positive note, right? With that, we're going to say thanks for this week. See you all next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.